Recording in progress.
Good morning, dear Dharma friends. Who am I? Should we do station identification? Is that the idea, Jamie? I am that which travels through the world thinking of itself as Robert Beatty. You know, as one says at 12-step meetings, "Hi, my name is Robert and I live in a profound delusion. I think that I'm Robert Beatty. I'm very convinced. I convinced most people around me. My parents thought I was Robert Beatty. Well, I was Robert Beatty to them, wasn't I? Oh, it's a strange thing. This is a broadcast. No, this is a Zoom meeting, and that is a broadcast to Facebook and YouTube of the Portland Insight Meditation Community, a place where awakening happens. Imagine that, a place where awakening happens. Thank you, Jim, for being here on Shotgun. Very early in our Zoom time, 2 years ago, we had an intrusion into one of our classes that was pretty gross. And so we stepped up our defenses, and I've never needed them once, which is nice. May it persist. A little moment of superstition. Oh no, now that I've mentioned it. Well, so a poem. A poem for beginnings. Wait, I have to take a moment to bask upon you. Wow. Even if all we did was this much, I'd still like to do it in the morning. I'd like to brag for a moment. I'm on a roll. I've done at least 20 and as much as 40 minutes of yoga every morning the last 3 mornings. Now that is a roll. And oddly enough, my body feels better. Isn't that strange? Oh well, back to work. That was Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, by the way. Now deceased, but known when he was alive as the world's greatest Qawwali singer. They are Sufis who sing about God. That's the only thing they sing about, the Qawwalis. He came from a family, I forget now how many generations, but it was numerous generations. And he decided he wasn't going to do it. And he would be breaking the family chain in Pakistan, and he had to go back. He couldn't not go back to his calling. I heard him here in Portland once, very near the end of his life. Seems to me we took our kids. We took our kids because, and they hated it. It was ridiculous. But we took the kids because we thought they really should be present with him once in their lifetime. All right. It's not so long since I shared this with you, but it popped up this morning and it just seems so exquisite. Distant Regard by someone called Tony Hoagland. Noticing that we're sitting, speaking, hearing. If I knew I would be dead by this time next year, I believe I would spend the months from now till then writing thank you notes to strangers and acquaintances, telling them, "You really were a great travel agent," or "I never got the taste of your kisses out of my mouth," or "Watching you walk across the street was part of my destination." It would be the equivalent, I think, of leaving a chocolate wrapped in shiny foil in the pillow of a guest in a hotel. Hotel of earth where we resided for some years together, I start to say, before I realize it's a terrible cliche and stop. And then go on, forgiving myself a mere split second, because now that I'm dying, I just go forward like water, flowing around obstacles and second thoughts. Not getting snagged, just continuing with my long list of thank yous, which seems to naturally expand to include sunlight and wind, and the aspen trees which gleam and glimmer in the yard, as if grateful for being soaked last night by the irrigation system invented by an individual to whom I am quietly grateful. Outside, it is autumn, the philosophical season, when cold air sharpens the intellect. The hills are red and copper in their shaggy majesty. The clouds blow overhead like governments and years. It took me a long time to understand the phrase distant regard, but I am grateful for it now. And I am grateful for my heart that turned out to be good after all, and grateful for my mind to which, in retrospect, I can see I have never been sufficiently kind. Now that's a poem, huh? Poof. And as Robert Bly would say, and did, well, now we know the bones of this poem. Let's hear its heart. If I knew I would be dead by this time next year, I believe I would spend the months from now till then writing thank you notes to strangers and acquaintances, telling them you really were a great travel agent, or I never got the taste of your kisses out of my mouth, or watching you walk across the room was part of my destination. It would be the equivalent, I think, of leaving a chocolate wrapped in shiny foil on the pillow of a guest in a hotel. Hotel of earth, where we resided for some years together, I start to say, before I realize it is a terrible cliche and stop, and then I go on, forgiving myself in a mere split second, because now that I'm dying, I just go forward like water, flowing around obstacles and second thoughts, not getting snagged, just continuing with my long list of thank yous, which seems to naturally expand to include sunlight and wind, and the aspen trees which gleam and shimmer in the yard, as if grateful for being soaked last night by the irrigation system invented by an individual to whom I am quietly grateful. Outside, it is autumn, the philosophical season. When cold air sharpens the intellect, the hills are red and copper in their shaggy majesty. The clouds blow overhead like governments and years. It took me a long time to understand the phrase distant regard, but I am grateful for it now. And I am grateful for my heart that turned out to be good after all, and grateful for my mind, to which, in retrospect, I can see I have never been sufficiently kind. So, dear friends, let us sit comfortably upright. And let us simply awaken to our true nature. Let us perhaps remember to make a habit of saying thank you to the world, of bringing love into every moment that we can, starting right here. Right here and right now. I aspire to love and accept myself exactly as I am in this moment. Let us say thank you to this body by paying attention to it. Let us love it by paying attention to the sensations of contact. Contact with the chair, the feet on the floor. Let us come home and be kind with the body and also with the mind. And how is it to be kind to the mind? Perhaps the kindest thing we can do is to bring mindfulness to bring remembrance of our intention to be mindful of breathing in and breathing out. That's enough. And then also to bring remembrance to the fact of the wandering mind. It wanders into the past and the future. Sometimes there are rivers of liking and disliking. There's resistance to life and grasping, sometimes desperately, after life. Sometimes there's lots of restlessness and agitation and worry. Sometimes there's sleepy, dull sloth and torpor. Sometimes there's doubt. And doubt's pretty slippery. It's what it ends practice temporarily or permanently for some people. And so let us say thank you to our breath by really, really coming home to it. To this very breathing in right now. Not to some image or fantasy, imagination. And this is not pranayama. We're not controlling the breath. We're not trying to breathe in one nostril or out another. We're not trying to breathe from the diaphragm in some particular way. This is the practice of truly relaxing. Not relaxing mindfulness. however, relaxing our way into concentration, where the mind comes and rests with the delicacy of a butterfly on each breath. We rest in the arms of a great ancient tradition. It's the human tradition. Taking the form of the teachings of the Buddha. 2,600 years. And one of the reminders from the heart of this tradition is that of the refuges, the triple gem. Perhaps you are noticing, as I am, that the world is truly unstable. That life is nothing but anicca, change. It's a challenge to let go of that delusion, more than a challenge. And so we have to support us the embrace of refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in being awake. I take refuge in the support of the long lineage of very loving people. Reminding, I take refuge in being awake, in the Dharma, in what actually happens. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Four Noble Truths, which manifest themselves 1,000 or 10,000 times a day. The Dharma, the way things actually are. And I take refuge in the Sangha, the community of practice, the sweet, loving arms of a long tradition. And so we come home to this breath right now, noticing any thoughts or any of the five hindrances as they arise, as mindfulness awakens. And again and again and again, we take the breath as our comforting home base. let us remember the intention of kindness. The Buddha's teachings are shot through from the very beginning with ahimsa, nonviolence. And any violence, any coercion we bring to our meditation practice is simply malware. It's just not helpful. So when thoughts arise, when obsession with something arises, when doubt arises, when lust and hate arise, when the mind is really out of control, when it's filled with criticism or jealousy or despair, depression, we turn toward it with mindfulness. Mindfulness with its companions, love and compassion. And as the great teacher Ajahn Chah put it beautifully, anytime you want to bring your practice into perfect balance, simply remember, this moment is like this. It's exactly like this. And the breath, our closest friend of a lifetime, comes and goes. And we become more and more intimate with it. It's like a relationship that goes on for decades. Closer and closer, doing the dance of life together. Awareness, breathing, and whatever the mind gets up to. The inward journey requires courage. The third factor of the 7 factors of enlightenment, persistence. The willingness to make true effort. But it's a different kind of effort than we usually make. Often, most often, it's the effort of renunciation. To decide when we come to meditate to actually sit still. To not scratch the itch. To give up some of our cherished freedom. Not to give it up to someone else, but to give it up to ourselves. And it's not a violent demand for sitting still. It really comes rolling out of love. I want to go inward is the call. And so we park the body. We come home to breathing. And some desire to move or to drink our tea or scratch an itch or go off into problem solving, something like that arises. But then we remember, all right, my intention, I am inward bound. Inward bound. And we're always starting over. Every breath is a new beginning. Every wandering mind that we awaken to is a new beginning. It's a new arriving in the present moment. Noticing how it is in this moment, in this mind, with great kindness. Is this a mind that's quiet and calm, or is it restless, agitated? Does it focus very easily on the breath, or is it difficult to even find the breath? Is there a sense of clear presence, or is there some pulling into sloth and torpor or fatigue? Is there liking or disliking? Embracing with sweet, loving mindfulness exactly what happens. Let us acknowledge the part in ourselves that wants to feel loved and loving, that remembers it's the only thing worth living for. And remember our own suffering in its various forms. The losses, the sickness, the anxieties. How can we not be compassionate with ourselves when we remember this? And so it is with others, all others. So on the in-breath we might breathe, may I be free from suffering. On the out-breath, may all beings, including everyone in our little gathering here in the mornings, including our friends, including those we cherish as the enemy, may I be free, may they all be free, may you all be free. Coming and going. Hello, dear friends. Michael, what do you think?
Hey, Robert.
Hi.
Did you just say my name?
I did. I said, what do you think about...
I think I've got a song for you if you like.
Oh, yeah, I'm ready.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Michael Shohan, wonderful friend of a lifetime. We've been through some swamps and some beautiful mountain peaks and quite a wonderful journey, Michael.
This song was written about 10 years ago. Sorry, I was screaming at the TV news yesterday, so my throat is... This is written about 10 years ago by me and a 14-year-old girl named Rainey. And it's called Rainey's Song. If I could, I'd send the stars into the center of your heart. Sorry.
Hey, Michael, pause
Yeah.
for a second, will you? Can you go into your settings easily? Do you know how to do that?
Not really, but I can listen.
Oh, up in the top left-hand corner, is there original sound or sound?
It says recording, and then there's a green something.
That won't do it. Well, let's not. What's happening is the noise cancellation is canceling the guitar, but your voice is coming through okay.
You can't hear the guitar at all?
No, because the noise canceling is turning it off. You can hear a little.
Like this?
Very little.
Okay, then I won't play for you because that's no good.
Okay.
But I will read your poem.
All right. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thanks for the info, Jamie.
Well, the song is about loving yourself, and it works better with music. So instead of that, I'll read you a poem about possibility. He's buying gas at a station surrounded by cornfields. It is hot, and he is thinking of the sea. Then the ground starts shaking, and he looks over. A semi is pulling up to the pumps, a circus truck hauling a long iron cage. And in the cage, he knows at once the biggest tiger in the world. The tiger sees him watching her. They look at each other for a while. Then she begins walking back and forth, taking her eyes off him only once to take in the landscape of cornfields. Both he and the tiger feel unreal. Then he hears her in his head. I have forgotten my name, she says. It has to do with Uwungalema, the name of the tree that bears fruit in drought and feeds the people. Later he says he remembers singing, let the freedom you want be the freedom you are. When he saw he'd forgotten what he was saying, then thought of the tiger and knew again.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael, if you would like, I would be happy to coach you through original sound if it doesn't become too much of a project distracting our time together with everyone.
I'd like to connect for you guys to connect offline rather than to do it here. That easily gets long.
Yeah. Thanks.
Michael, is it okay with you if I give Aaron your contact info?
Yeah, I was just saying that muted. I'll send my email and we can hook up.
Okay, maybe put it in the chat right now and he could get it.
Exactly.
Anyway. I was thinking of compassion this morning, feeling great waves of it actually. And as I was sitting, I had a memory. And I've thought, I spent a little while, sometimes things come out of my mouth and then afterwards I think, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. And this was one of those, but I really think it's okay. It was so potent for me. It comes up in this time of such military horror in the world. And I was at a mythopoetic men's conference in Mendocino. This is a long time ago, 30 years ago at least, with Michael Meade and James Hillman and Robert Bly and 120 men. And at the time, I hated men. I was raised by my mother and sisters, and there was a lot of disdain for men, which is difficult if you happen to be one. So anyway, I went to these conferences for several years, and among the things that we did was that each man was invited to stand sometime in a group of 120 men, and he had as much as 5 minutes to speak his truth. And Robert Bly at the beginning of one of these conferences said, I don't want to hear about your wives. I don't want to hear about the other people you're married to or in relationship with. I want to hear about you. And some astounding sharings happened. I got to hear men speaking. And then one day, and this is the thing that came to mind this morning, one day there was a very big man. He was about 6'5", 260 pounds. I mean, a really big guy. and not fat at all, just like a football player. And he got up and wept. And then he shared with us, I was in Vietnam, and I was a Green Beret, and I was on an assassination team. And I killed many people. And he then sobbed. And he said, I was young, I was indoctrinated, but I still did it. I am. And then he just wept. And there was a lot of weeping. Because we can believe anything, you know. We can be living in Russia, and we can believe that if what we hear is what we become. So anyway, he wept and said, I know no one can forgive me. It's my own work. And then after 5 minutes or so, he sat down. And that took us down into a few notches of honesty. And then there was another man, quite a bit younger than him in the room, shaped very similarly. And he stood up and said, he's my father. I've grown up with his PTSD and his anger, and I'm really glad to be here with him in his sadness. And we then went on. Michael Meade led us he's an amazing facilitator. We were in an old conservation corps, one of those old wood lodges, kind of long. And they had they had at one end of the room were the men who went to Vietnam and who fought and who were there. And at the other end, there were those who didn't go. And they required us to take sides. Were we for or against, basically? And I said, well, I was Canadian, so I didn't really, and blah, blah, blah. And in the end, I went to the side that said I didn't want this war. And then they drew a chalk line in the middle of the room down, and then a bright, they used duct tape. There was a duct tape line. And the rule was no one crosses the line. And then they had 6 drummers. There were 3 on each side. And then they started drumming. And then men started speaking to one another across the line. And one of the things Michael is very incredibly, I've never seen anybody like him, he calls it deepening the conflict. And the conflict grew and grew. And in the end, men were standing on tables and screaming at each other, you expletive baby killer, and you coward, and so on. And it got really heavy. Scary, actually. And it went on for quite some time. 20 minutes, maybe more. I can't remember. And then somehow or another, it started kind of running out of gas. And it ran out of gas. And then we discovered that the common experience of many of the men in the room was shame. Shamed if you went and fought, and shame if you didn't go, because for whatever reason. But it was an amazing meditative moment, because we then all fell into silence. And then there was more drumming, and there was more acknowledging of the things that we do, the things that we're conditioned to do, can sometimes be so awful, and also can be so exquisitely beautiful. And this is connecting back to the meditation and the reflection I was having this morning. What we're doing here is really important. This is where love comes into the world. This is transforming our lives is the most powerful thing we can do for world peace. Right? And recognizing how vulnerable we are. I guess this was also prompted. I listened to what's it called? Michael Barbaro, the New York Times thing, the Daily, on a fellow reporting from Russia, what's happening with Russians, for Russians, and how they're being stoked into hatred and fear. And that's happening here too, of course. So how do we step off being provoked into hatred? And how do we develop our loving and compassionate and wise side? Well, this is it. So what we do here is of utmost importance. Because the Buddha said that short of awakening, a human being can do anything given the conditioning. So we're stepping out of our conditioning again and again with this apparently very simple but very potent practice. So that's more than I thought I would say, but that was in the direction that I meant. So, anything happening with you folks? Anything you'd like to respond to that, to Michael's poem, or anything else that's happening in your life?
Robert, it's Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, sorry to jump in so fast. I've been to a number of those retreats in Mendocino with Michael Mead, and I've seen a number of things like what you just described. And taking it back to your thought about witnessing, a lot of the kids that come to the conferences are gangbangers down in Oakland and Los Angeles. And they've never been witnessed, and they've never been loved. And I remember talking to one of the kids about poetry. And I bought him a book that had been edited by Michael and Robert Bly, James Hillman.
Oh, yeah.
And he couldn't understand that I was giving it to him. And he kept on giving it back to me, and he couldn't understand it. And finally I said, it's paid for, it's yours, please enjoy it. And later on that night, we had a big dinner, and he stood up and he said he had never been given a gift before. And he began to cry, and then he pointed to me and he said, this stranger gave me this thing, I don't even know this guy. And then he did a remarkable thing. He came toward me very quickly and took off his shirt and said, I would give my shirt off my back to this guy. And we were both just crying. But the thing is that there's a lot of people walking around brilliant. These people are brilliant poets, brilliant thinkers, brilliant feelers. And what they need is witness and love. And it's very, very simple to give. And when I listen to you talk about loving meditations and guiding us through those feelings, I hear you telling us or asking us to witness ourselves, which is also very simple. But to me, it's two. I witness myself and forgive myself and have compassion. And then I take what I can call from that and witness other people, which is effortless. Buy them a book, buy them an ice cream cone. So this stuff is profound, but I think it's very durable and very simple with a little intention.
Thanks, Michael. The rag and bone shop of the heart.
Robert, hi.
Hi, Margie.
Hi. I have something to add to this, and it's interesting that this is all coming right now because I just watched Above Us Only Sky, which just came on Netflix. It's about John and Yoko, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and about the what they did, how they collaborated, and the peace movement. And while I was watching it, there was a clip of Yoko as a little girl in Japan, and her family, it was during the war, and Japan was being bombed, and the family had to go out to the countryside, and they were, she was maybe 6 and her brother was about 4, and they were hungry. And so she would tell her brother stories, and she said, imagine the food that you would like to eat. And so he said ice cream. She was telling this story in the film. And so that's where imagine came from. And they had film clips of her running around in a little dress, a little girl, so sweet. Well, my dad was a navigator on the bombers, one of the bombers that was bombing Japan. He was 20 years old, basically just out of high school. He went to officers training, and he was in that part of the war. So he was bombing the country while she was this little girl making Imagine, using Imagine as the way to get through. And so I always felt for my father, because I think that he couldn't, when he told the story of the man who's a sniper, I don't think he ever had any counseling about that. And he just kind of went on with his life. The war is over, and then you just go into your life. Well, he went into his life, and the two oldest, to have a lot of Catholic, children, the two oldest in my family are mentally ill. And his first son is not, he's not a functioning guy. And I think there's a connection. So when you mentioned the man and the son, that made it kind of come around for me. And I've always felt for my father, because he never had that opportunity. But I think that it affected him deeply all his life, even though he was a successful person in many ways. So we're all so there's Yoko making. I always loved the song Imagine, and so that's where it came from. That's this little, yeah, that's where my head was last weekend.
Thank you, Marky. That's very beautiful. In all my years of counseling and teaching people, I almost, part of my intake interview, depending upon the age, of course, is, have you been in combat? Have you participated in war? And then I also ask, did your father or did your mother, and then there's the other question, what other huge traumas have come through in your life? And this is one that's generations. We're just barely out of Afghanistan and Iraq, and so the cost of that is rippling through our culture all the time. Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, Sangha. This is Jamie.
Hello, Jamie.
Same theme about the things we've done that we still suffer over, or the things that our families have been a part of. There is something to be said for kind of closing the loop. And my great granddad owned a lot of property in North Idaho, and he's the one that sold the land to Richard Butler, who went on to found the Aryan Nations. And that's in my family history. And I remember growing up, we had our driveway across the way, and it's just 12-foot by 12-foot swastika in front of a Confederate flag, and our mailbox was right there. So that was what it was like. And I felt really sort of personally responsible for that for a long time. How could I ever, be a good person with that in my history? And it's just sort of recognizing it's all of our history, and we all share a history. So it's I'm not being very eloquent about it, but our same family that did the tearing down is the same family that's going to build it back up and heal it. So it can be kind of a way to close a loop by loving it, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Thank you. Denise said in the chat, my veteran brother with severe PTSD is not doing well these days, like Robert says. It ripples through so many parts of so many lives. Yeah. I would guess the TV news is very upsetting to a lot of veterans.
Hi, Robert. Oh,
It's Joy.
did someone else speak? Anyway, I just further to this conversation. My thoughts have been torturing me lately, and I just wondered whether it was a template of thinking that I might have inherited from my father, who was a war refugee. He grew up in a war and never really recovered. And then I was raised in that atmosphere of kind of negativity and fear and horror and so on. So when we breathe and pay attention to our thoughts, they can be really horrible. And so I just want distraction. And there are lots of ways of being distracted by, all kinds of entertainment. So what do you think about that kind of issue of these awful thoughts that don't seem to be affected by optimism or positive thinking? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of a poem or a little prose piece I'd like to share with you. Oops, not there. There. Poetry, roll down. Down. It's Pema Chodron. In the process of awakening, the journey goes down, not up. It's as if the mountain pointed toward the center of the earth instead of reaching into the sky. Instead of transcending the suffering of all creatures, we move toward the turbulence and the doubt. We jump into it, we slide into it, we tiptoe into it, we move toward it however we can. We explore the reality and unpredictability of insecurity and pain, and we try not to push it away. If it takes years, if it takes lifetimes, we let it be as it is. At our own pace, without speed or aggression, we move down and down and down. With us move millions of others, our companions in awakening from fear. At the bottom, we discover water, the healing water of awakening. Right down there in the thick of things, we discover the love that will not die. So we come together as community. We build as much trust as we can. We hold each other's hands when the dark sides emerge. We listen to each other. And we slowly integrate. We slowly, sometimes we make big leaps. We face into that which we don't want to. And this formal meditation is a huge piece of it. Why is it that I keep saying, sit like a rock? Give up moving for a while. Because every time we move, every time we distract a little bit, we stop the downward movement with the inward movement. We get pulled up to the surface again. And so regular practice will, in fact, bring stuff to the surface. The TM movement was very, very clear on this. Don't do more than 20 minutes twice a day. And that was so that people didn't get into very deep stuff. They could avoid the uproar that will sometimes happen when we meditate. Because when we stop, whatever's left inside of us to heal starts coming to the fore. And then we notice, oh gosh, I'm smoking more weed again, or oh, I started drinking again, or wow, I'm watching a lot of TV. And often people come to me and say, well, I was doing so well in my daily practice, and then I stopped. And I then show off a little bit, and I say, what was happening around the time that you stopped? Oh, my mother died, and we stop because what we're facing into is unbearable, so we don't want to do it anymore. And that's when we need Sangha, we need community, we need support. So is that making any sense, Joy?
Yeah, thank you. It just, I prefer to have lovely, beautiful, calm thoughts at the moment, but.
God, please raise your hand, folks, if you prefer lovely, beautiful, calm thoughts. Right, but sometimes we don't get a choice.
No. Okay, thank you. Such a benefit. Thank you.
Well, this is a lovely connection this morning, huh?
I'd like to share something that I've observed in myself, and my particular, continually going back to check the news, and I've sort of made a connection to that, and like the whole thing about like where you get hooked into a program that like leaves the end of the episode, it leaves it such a unsatisfying situation, right? The child is kidnapped, and are they going to get out, or whatever, and so you have to watch the next episode because you need to see how it resolves. And I've realized that a very similar thing happens when I keep on going back to check the news. It's like, what's happening right now? And the desire, like this internal desire for it to not be what it is, the desire for the situation to end. And unlike the storytelling world of Netflix and television shows and whatnot, it's real time, and it's not going to clicking on the news. I can't fast forward. There is no fast forward button, and so I think that there's just something for me that just to simply notice that is really helpful, and to realize that it's not helpful to try to do this unhelpful thing, but it's really hard. It's just it's just really hard just to simply know.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
Well, my friends, I must go fairly soon. Anybody sitting with something you'd like to share? So let us join our hearts in song. May all beings receive all blessings. Bhavatu Sabe Mangalam. Bhavatu Sabe Mangalam. Bhavatu Sabe Mangalam. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a lovely mindful day, dear friends. Goodbye.